Why do I do this work? We were talking about it last night. I realised that part of it was I grew up in an immigrant family. My parents immigrated to New Zealand and I was the firstborn, and so that world view was always there. And my father and mother were both evacuated during the Second World War. You know, this unaccompanied children thing isn't a new thing. It happened during the Second World War, and that was my first aha moment, thinking, I come from that background. I come from the effects of that background. Being a part of an immigrant family, recognising that community was important, it's not just the immediate family. Because I didn't have grandparents around. I didn't have aunts and uncles. I had my immediate family. And I had these people around me who played that role. When I think back on some of the child protection work I've been involved in, this importance of community, I think, has been strengthened in me. It may not be the blood relative, but it's someone very important to that child. And so you can exclude people very quickly if you just talk about your definition of family. My first experience overseas was in Pakistan in 1983. And I was working as a nurse. I've got a nursing background. Florence Nightingale was my hero. So I worked in a hospital with refugees from Afghanistan. And that's where I realised politics, you can't be neutral. Any altruism or naivety I had about doing humanitarian work was knocked out of me really quickly because the politics was so strong there. And I remember very clearly it played out with one of the Afghan doctors. He went out to the market one day, came back, and his wife and 4 daughters had been killed by some people who weren't happy with him. And then the next day they came back and killed his son because his son had run ahead and seen them. Remember, the reaction to that was, don't spend time with any of these people. We don't want you to have a reputation of showing favour to one group versus the other. There was something in me that continued to nag at me that, yeah, I wanted to keep contributing to the greater good. I was in Romania in 91, and it was called an emergency program for World Vision at that stage. In 91, you know, we were going into this orphanage. Kids hadn't been out of the building. They were 18 months old and never exited that building. We had children who would be walking sideways because that's the only way they learned to walk up and down cots, you know, their cots. And you saw them just going down backwards in their development, and it was heartbreaking. It was a very difficult environment, and you know, parents not being able to visit. I remember very particularly one little boy called Radulescu. When I look back, there's particular children or people who taught me a lesson that you can't sort of get out of your mind. And Radulescu was this ugly little kid in the eyes of many people, and he was a gypsy kid. We were doing tracing and trying to reunify children with their families. They took their child, Radulescu, away. I remember being very happy for the child to be with his family. But then a few months later he came back and he was emaciated, and I realised that there weren't the support services and there wasn't that support to that family for that little boy to thrive. And so I've often thought about the importance of systems that actually are really supportive to keep children in their communities. I chose to stay in an NGO, and to the one NGO for all my career. I remember going to Rwanda, and it was like, now you're doing emergency work. One of the passions that's kept me with World Vision is really wanting to look at how do you change organisational behaviour and not just individuals. And for me it was realising that other sectors have to get engaged in child protection. I think Rwanda, for me, the inter-agency collaboration that happened there pulled back to my child protection work in New Zealand, where I was in public health, and we had interagency. We worked with police, we worked with the social workers, we worked with the schools to follow up families that needed protection, where children were victims or survivors of abuse. For me, I'm very grateful for that background because it meant I had this vision that actually we have to work with others. We can't not. World Vision wrote this book after Rwanda about complex humanitarian emergencies, and I wrote a chapter. I wrote down our principles, and one of them was a holistic principle, that we had to look at children and at health for me at that point, not only being the absence of disease but also the physical, psychological and social well-being. And then this community perspective was the second one, that communities do have a lot more of the answers than we thought they did. Participative, yeah, this, the voices of children listening. Then collaborative, which I've talked about, and then this integrated. And I think for me it was very much thinking around how do different organisations, but also how does one organisation that does lots of different sectoral things, how do you help change the thinking and mindset? Something about pushing to make sure that other sectors were very much seeing themselves as protection, that they had a role in protection as well. Then I see the people perspective, and I think for me the people piece was, we were so good, donors wanted buildings, and going, well, we're not going to build an orphanage, you know, we're going to have children and families, and there may be some youth activities that have a drop-in centre component, but we're not going to build a building. I think of child-friendly spaces with some sadness, because I think the original vision for them has not become what the vision was. So I remember in Rwanda this child who had a disability. She had a loving family. They doted over this daughter when she was finally reunited. She had a horror, I mean, she had STDs and she'd been raped. The next door neighbouring family, they were two parents, but that child got beaten. We were designing these programs that were so targeted on a certain type of children. I'm really glad we've kind of moved around and look at vulnerability, and vulnerability changes. Donors don't think that they want results. This is the thing I find really frustrating, and this is where quality versus quantity is I think one of the biggest challenges in the child protection field. There's something about a 15-year view which I think is healthy, and they want results and they want scale. Scale and results is what we keep getting. Scale and results. West Africa sexual exploitation, I guess one of the things I think about a lot is we need to use opportunities as they come up. And I think for many NGOs, it was horrific to think about what happened in West Africa, but not necessarily hugely surprising. Some of us took the opportunity of that was to really raise the issue of child protection in our organisation and in how we view children and what does the protection of children look like. Some of these principles are still the same, but when I did an organisational change course, one of the things someone said, I said, oh, it's all, I was doing a program and I said, it's all falling apart. And the guy who was my coach said, Heather, sometimes it's like you're knitting a jersey, and there's one little mistake you realise afterwards in the middle of that, and you have to unravel things to re-knit it. And I was thinking in some ways it's kind of, we've got guidelines and principles. The principles probably don't change, but the way we're needing to re-knit it to be what it needs for that community or that setting is the thing that's different. I do feel as though I've made a small contribution to a large organisation that's very involved in emergency work, and we've still got a long way to go. I think what's interesting recently, and this is my last point, is they've stepped away a little bit from child protection and emergencies to really focus on development and get the foundations of root causes and risks to children in a development setting, getting much deeper understanding of that. I'm excited to see other people take little bits of pieces that maybe I've shared with them and see them grow and develop with it and make it what it needs to be in their context. And I think that's what motivates me. Now I'm in a management role because managers make decisions, technical specialists give advice. So thank you for having me. Allowing me to be here.
Can we make some comments?